Coming up on Network Africa. Death toll rises above 100 in Central African Republic mine collapse. Zambian authorities confirm killing of former minister during security raid as opposition leader vows to challenge last week's election result in court. Plus, long queues outside petrol stations and protesters take to the streets amid fuel crisis in Libya. Hello everyone, welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We begin in the Central African Republic, where the death toll from a gold mine collapse in the Western Central African Republic has risen above 100, with several others still missing or trapped underground. Officials say the disaster struck an artisanal mine near the Cameroon border, highlighting the dangers facing thousands of informal miners. More than 100 people have died after an artisanal gold mine collapsed on Tuesday morning in the village of Zamboye in Nana Mambere Prefecture near the border with Cameroon. The death toll was confirmed by a local Red Cross volunteer involved in rescue efforts and a member of the Zamboye Youth Council. Several survivors are said to be critically injured, while others are still believed to be trapped underneath the rubble. In Zambia, police have confirmed the death of former Minister Mutobwe Kapwaya in last week's security raid on a house linked to opposition leader Brian Mudumbile. The Zambian police say that the 49-year-old Mutobwe Kapwaya was fatally wounded when officers came under fire during a security operation in Lusaka. The raid comes after President Hakainde Hichilema secured a second term with 60% of the vote. Mr. Mudumbile, who received 38%, says he will challenge the result in court. Authorities arrested 11 people and accused Mr. Mudumbile's party of insurgency and storing high-grade weapons. Mr. Mudumbile has rejected the allegations as fabrications, reiterating his call to challenge the 13 August presidential election result in court. In a statement, Brian Mudumbile said his campaign had documented serious irregularities and inconsistencies surrounding the conduct, counting, transmission, and declaration of the results. He said he issued his statement from an undisclosed location, claiming he was under protection due to unspecified threats. While last week's vote was largely peaceful, the opposition said its campaign was marred by intimidation and restrictions, concerns that were also echoed by international election observers. Meanwhile, spokesperson for the UN Human Rights Office, Ravina Shamsandani, has commented on reports of arrests and detentions of opposition members in Zambia before and after the general election. Following the reports, Ms. Shamdasani urged authorities in Zambia to stop arbitrary arrests, calling on them to fully uphold the due process rights of all those detained. She further stressed that all arrests and further proceedings, whatever the gravity of the alleged conduct or the specific charges filed, must be fully consistent with international human rights standards and, of course, Zambian law.
Concerned by reports of arrests and detentions of opposition members in Zambia both before and after the recent election. We urge the authorities to stop arresting people arbitrarily. We call on them to uphold fully the due process rights of all those detained. All arrests and court proceedings, whatever the gravity of the alleged conduct or specific charges filed, must be fully consistent with international human rights standards and Zambian law. Specifically, all detainees must be notified at the time of their arrest for the reasons of their arrest and promptly informed of any charges against them. They must also be allowed access to legal representation as well as communication with their families. They must be treated humanely while in custody and be brought promptly before a judge. At this critical post-election juncture, it is essential to uphold respect for human rights and to ensure that any grievances arising from the election are voiced and addressed peacefully and in accordance with international human rights law.
Let's get more on all the happenings in Zambia's post-election crisis. Joining us now is Mumbi Kaseshia, a media and governance consultant. Thank you for joining us on the program. Right, so let's start with the most troubling development. Opposition figures have been arrested during a security raid involving gunfire, and unfortunately a former minister was killed. Authorities say they were acting on a threat to state security. How dire is the security situation in the country at this time to warrant this raid that led to the death of a former official?
Well, I think we have to begin by separating the political narrative from the security facts that have been presented by the Zambian authorities. What the Zambian government has said is that what the Zambian government has said is that this was not an operation directed at opposition politicians because of their political affiliation. The authorities say they had been monitoring individuals over a period of time because of suspected activities involving military plans, illegal training on and a potential threat to state security. Now, during the operation, the government says security officers recovered high-grade military weapons, ammunition, and other material allegedly connected to an armed insurrection, and 11 people eventually were arrested. Now, that is a very serious security allegation. If law enforcement agencies have credible information suggesting that an armed group is being organized or that weapons are being assembled for an insurrection, the government has a constitutional and statutory duty, obviously, to intervene. Now, let me draw your attention to the Zambian constitution, which also permits deprivation of liberty where there is reasonable suspicion that somebody has committed a crime or is about to commit a crime, a criminal offense, rather. It also allows legally authorized measures relating to defense, public safety, and public order. Now, the criminal procedure code, the Zambia Criminal Procedure Code, is equally clear. Police may arrest without a warrant where they have reasonable grounds to suspect that a person has committed a cognizable offense. Now, the code also specifically empowers police to take preventative action where they know of a plan to commit such an offense and believe it can not otherwise be prevented. And I do believe, and most of the people that have been analyzing this incident, unfortunate incident, will attest to the fact that when an investigation is conducted and a threat is established, the police will definitely move in.
Right, and still on the arrest, the UN Human Rights Chief has expressed concern and has called for due process, to follow. As a governance consultant, what do you think of the legitimacy of the state security enforcement that will not cross the line into political repression?
Well, I think the UN's concerns about due process and legitimate issues for any democratic government to take has to be taken seriously. But due process should not be confused with preventing the state from enforcing the law. The key question is whether people were arrested because of their political opinions or because law enforcement agencies had reasonable grounds to suspect criminal conduct. Now, like I was telling you earlier, Zambian law provides a very clear answer. Article 13 of the Zambian Constitution permits arrest on reasonable suspicion of criminal offense. It also requires that an arrested person be informed of the reason for the arrest and where the person is not released, be brought before a court without undue delay. Now, the Criminal Procedure Code similarly allows arrest without a warrant, like I did mention earlier. Police have reasonable grounds to suspect a cognizable offense and requires persons persons arrested without a warrant to be taken before the appropriate judicial authority without unnecessary delay. So from a governance perspective, I would say that the government has a legitimate security mandate, but that mandate operates within the law. And there is an important distinction here. Being an opposition politician does not give somebody immunity from criminal investigation, just as being arrested does not make somebody guilty. Now, the government says the arrest arose from a security investigation involving specific, rather suspected militia activity and weapons. The opposition disputes that account, of course. Now, the proper test, therefore, is evidence. If there is evidence of criminal conduct, let the courts deal with it. If there isn't sufficient evidence, the law provides mechanisms for release and judicial redress. That is actually how we prevent political repression, not by paralyzing the security agencies, but by ensuring that security powers remain subject to constitutional safeguards and judicial oversight.
Right, and this is post-election season. The opposition says the presidential election was marred by irregularities and it's taken the matter to court. But the Electoral Commission has already declared President Hichilema the winner. What, in your assessment, are the strongest pieces of evidence the opposition would need to present for a court to challenge to have a realistic chance of succeeding?
Well, first, I think it's important to acknowledge that the losing candidate, Brian Mundubile, is entirely entitled to use the constitutional process. State House, this is the official residence of the Republican president, and also the office of the president is stationed there. Has itself said that he is within his constitutional rights to challenge the results, provided he brings sufficient evidence before the courts. But the burden now shifts from political statements to evidence, like you rightly put it in your question. So the constitutional framework provides for a presidential election petition where a petitioner argues that the president-elect was not validly elected, or that the constitutional or other legal requirements relating to the presidential election was not complied with. Now, the petition must be brought within the 7 days of the declaration of the president-elect. So there's still time, obviously, for Brian Mundubile to take the matter to court. So what would constitute persuasive evidence? Now, to answer your question, I would expect the opposition to need specific, verifiable and material evidence. For example, documented violations of the electoral law, credible evidence showing that irregularities occurred in the particular constituencies or polling processes, evidence that such irregularities were sufficiently serious to affect the result, and credible witnesses or official electoral documentation capable of establishing those claims. Simply put, that there were irregularities being cited enough to mount a successful presidential petition in the Zambian Constitutional Court. And there is an important point in the government's favor here. The election was administered by the Electoral Commission of Zambia, which is constitutionally mandated to manage elections. The commission declared President Hichilema, like you did mention, got 60%. The Mundubile, who has indicated that he will be petitioning the election, got about 38%. So there were certainly incidents during the election period. Vote counting was temporarily suspended for a few hours after reported attacks on election officials and theft of ballot papers. But the Electoral Commission subsequently said the security situation had been contained and continued and counting and voting continued. So those instances should be navigated or investigated where necessary, but they do not automatically invalidate the entire election. If the opposition has evidence, let it present that evidence before the Constitutional Court. That is stronger than trying to win the argument politically. I think the whole issue will have to be based on evidence.
Right. I must thank you again for your contributions and your perspective on the political situation in Zambia. Mumbi Kaseyia, a media and governance consultant who joined us on the post-Zambia election crisis. And still to come on the program. Act early before warning signs become casualty lists. United Nations calls for greater protection for people who risk their lives to help others. Welcome back. The government of South Africa has assured that the country will not run out of water despite growing concerns over aging infrastructure, rising demand and pressure on the country's water resources. Water and Sanitation Deputy Minister David Maklobo says billions of rand are being invested to strengthen infrastructure and secure reliable water supplies for the future. Our South Africa correspondent Innocent Simusa reports.
South Africa is facing growing pressure on its water infrastructure, but government says the country will not run out of water. Water and Sanitation Deputy Minister David Maklobo says billions of rands are being invested to secure water supplies and strengthen infrastructure. The government is also working to address challenges linked to aging water systems, maintenance backlogs, and of course rising demand. Maklobo says also the investment is aimed at ensuring that South Africa has a reliable and sustainable water supply as pressure on resources continue to grow. But also the assurance comes amid increasing concerns over water security, with municipalities across the country facing infrastructure challenges and in some areas, of course, disruptions in supply. But the government, we do know that says investment in new infrastructure, maintenance and improved water management will be critical to preventing a water crisis and ensuring that communities in the country and businesses at large have access to reliable supplies. Now, officials maintain that while the challenges, of course, are significant, South Africa has the resources and plans needed to secure its water future. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Simos, Channels Television News.
Let's now bring you up to speed with the latest updates on the evacuation of Nigerians from South Africa's 83 returnees arrived in Lagos from Johannesburg aboard a South African Airways flight as the federal government receives and processes the latest batch of Nigerians returning home. The returnees are being received at the Murtala Mohammed International Airport by officials of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and are being handed over to relevant government agencies for documentation and profiling ahead of their reunification with their families. The repatriation exercise is being facilitated through flight tickets procured by private individuals whose support is enabling the safe return of Nigerians. The federal government is also reaffirming its commitment to the welfare and safe return of Nigerians abroad while appreciating the Nigerian mission in South Africa and all individuals and agencies supporting and the reception and reintegration process. This is part of multiple batches of Nigerians that have been returning home from South Africa over the last couple of months following the xenophobia attacks on Nigerians as well as other Africans in South Africa. China's unilateral zero tariff policy covering 100% of tariff lines for 53 African nations, which took effect in May this year, is being seen as an opportunity to reposition China as a major market for Nigerian products. The policy is scheduled to run through April 30, 2028. Business leaders, the academia, and members of the diplomatic corps converged on the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs to discuss these opportunities and implications for Africa. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Amrachi Bani, reports.
Set in the conference chamber of the NIIA, this gathering of members of the diplomatic corps business leaders, and the academia seeks to dissect the advantages of the unilateral zero-policy tariff on 53 African countries by China. NIIA Director General Professor Hossa Sagai welcomes participants with a comparison of China's unilateral zero-policy tariff with the U.S. trade tariffs imposed on the rest of the world.
China is demonstrating that in the face of the geopolitical shifts, it can be counted on to be pro-Africa.
Director, Center for China Studies, Mr. Charles Onunaiju, explained that the zero tariff should not be seen as the finish line for Nigerian manufacturers, but the starting point.
China has provided what they call green lane for very quick and fast processing of products coming from Africa. Meanwhile, a whole range of African countries, since May, has begun to reap. Kenya has exported avocado, South Africa has exported spice, Zambia is exporting honey and meat. What are we waiting for?
The Chinese Consul General Yan Yuqin reiterated the message by the Chinese President Xi Jinping, who announced the implementation of the zero tariff as a commemoration of the 70th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Africa and China.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi vividly described this initiative as an arithmetic equation using the subtraction of tariffs to drive the addition of trade and achieve the multiplication of livelihoods.
A panel discussion follows after with focus on the impact of the zero tariff policy.
This policy is not about us exporting hitherto raw materials, just uproot and export. It is about value addition.
The market is an opportunity, not an automatic economic transformation. Tariffs can be removed, but production must still occur domestically.
There are, of course, other issues that have been identified in this relationship with China as it continues a zero-policy tariff with Nigeria. Issues such as language and Chinese government investing in Nigerian companies. Experts in the room agree that these issues should be discussed along the way as the relationship continues. Here at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, Amarachi Ubani, Channels Television News.
We shift attention now to the fuel crisis in Libya as dozens of vehicles have formed long queues outside petrol stations in Misrata amid an ongoing fuel shortage. Locals have questioned the reasons behind the continued scarcity in a country whose economy relies heavily on oil, asking the government where the oil is going and how long the fuel shortages will continue in a country rich in oil and petroleum resources. Alongside the fuel crisis, Libya is also facing growing pressure on its electricity sector, with power outages continuing and intensifying during the summer. Energy facilities in the western part of the country have also come under drone attacks recently. In light of this, separate demonstrations have erupted in Zawiya, where dozens of protesters set tires ablaze and blocked roads in the western region. They are demanding jobs, reliable electricity and fuel supplies, while also calling for Prime Minister Abdul Hamid Deiba to resign. Similar demonstrations erupted in Tripoli, Misrata and other areas in late July, with protesters demanding better public services and calling for the government to step down. The United States has launched a $125,000 cultural preservation grant to support the conservation of the historic Leisure iron smelting site in Enugu State. The site, also known as Ichekwaba, is believed to date back to around 2000 BCE and is regarded as one of the earliest known iron smelting sites in sub-Saharan Africa. At the launch, U.S. Consul General Brandon Hudspeth highlighted the role of cultural preservation in strengthening ties between Nigeria and the United States. The project will support the preservation of the site, 3D digital documentation and physical conservation, helping to safeguard an important part of Nigeria's early history of technology and innovation for future generations. The event also showcases the Cultural Heritage Forward Program, a U.S.-Nigeria cultural exchange initiative organized in partnership with the Smithsonian Institution. And staying with the United Nations, the agency is calling for greater protection for people who risk their lives to help others and who's responsible for attacks against them to be held to account. The call comes as the agency marks World Humanitarian Day 2026. Each year, World Humanitarian Day focuses on the theme, bringing together partners from across the humanitarian system to advocate for the survival, well-being, and dignity of people affected by crisis, as well as the safety and security of aid workers. Despite repeated commitments to protect humanitarian workers, more than 1,000 aid workers have been killed in the past 3 years, from conflict zones to humanitarian emergencies around the world.
As High Commissioner for Refugees, I see every day what the courage of humanitarian workers makes possible. I see colleagues on the front lines, often far from world's attention, protecting families forced from their homes, delivering assistance and helping people find a path towards safety and solutions.
And as we draw the curtains on today's program, here's our fun facts from the continent. Did you know Nigeria, home, is home to the world's rarest suspended lakes? The Iyake Lake, perched on the top of Adoiwaye Mountain in Oyo State, is often described as one of only 2 natural suspended lakes in the world, with the other in Colorado, United States. What makes it even more fascinating is its reputation as a bottomless lake, description rooted in local tradition and legend. A mysterious lake sitting on a mountaintop right here in Nigeria. And that's where we close the program. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Joke Rajas.